Computer-generated imagery, or CGI, is a mainstay of the modern blockbuster, and the incredible digital creations imagined by filmmakers and brought to life by visual effects artists have become a draw in and of themselves. The evolution of this facet of modern filmmaking began with boundary-pushing innovations by pioneering artists as far back as Georges Méliès, who used in-camera techniques and double exposures to produce hitherto impossible visual effects. When digital technology first began to make its mark on the world of cinema, the results were quite comparable to these early efforts by Méliès, in that the revolutionary technology was used primarily as a gimmick before it was regarded as a serious filmmaking tool. Early CGI was, more often than not, little more than a novelty around which synopses were shaped, effectuating premises that would have been too expensive or impractical with previous production methods. However, as CGI entered its sophomoric years, directors at the forefront of their craft began to take advantage of the increasing realism permitted by this improving technology, and to integrate CGI into films that were otherwise more grounded, conventional narratives. The most notable transition from the early efforts to incorporate digital images into live-action films is the emphasis on the appearance of interaction between the flesh and blood actors and the CGI creations. This increased focus on realistic textures and physicality helped further the illusion that these digital conjurations could touch and be touched by characters in the story. This is referred to as hapticity, the recognition of a thing through the sense of touch. The effort to make CGI images haptic, or appearing touchable, made them seem all the more real to the viewer, and thus, from a theoretical standpoint, far more fascinating. One of the more notable examples of this premise, despite its notoriously problem-wrought production, was James Cameron's The Abyss. The Abyss contains one of the first extended live-action sequences to feature a fully CGI creation interacting seamlessly with human characters. Here, the computer-generated entity represents an unknown and mysterious element to the story, and the CGI endows it with the appropriate otherworldliness. But if we look beyond what the scene represents as a technical achievement, and view it through the lens of concepts put forth by prominent film theorists such as Jacques Lacan, Laura Mulvey, and Slavoj Žižek, the effect these images have on the viewer may go beyond the cognizant. These theorists, among others, have contributed to the notion that the computer-generated image is fetishized by the viewer, much in the same way that they often might fetishize the human body. It is important here to note that this field of psychological theory, known as psychoanalytics, is not by any means incontestable or universally accepted, but it can serve as a fascinating lens through which to study film, and in this case, early advent CGI. According to Slavoj Žižek, the fetishism of a filmic image involves the active belief in something the subject knows to be untrue. When an image is fetishized, it is allowed to hold a certain, very real power over the viewer, despite their knowledge that the image is a product of artifice, a simulacrum of a real but non-present thing. As the fetishistic viewing of the human body can produce a very real reaction in the viewer, the fetishism of a computer-generated image can affect viewers just as substantially. The basis of psychoanalytic theory rests on the work of Sigmund Freud, and his ideas concerning castration anxiety and the Oedipus complex. Suffice it to say, these concepts are far too broad to explain in a single video, but to briefly summarize, they suggest that a universal component of the human psyche is a deep-seated fear of castration, and that threat derives from the recognition of the physical form of the male and female body. The female form and her lack of a phallus invokes the fear of castration in the male, while the male form reminds the female of her lack of a phallus or her prenatal castration. Again, these are not universally accepted truths by any means, and have been met with their fair share of criticism. But in studying early CGI with these notions in mind, sequences like that in The Abyss can be seen to take on new meaning. If, as certain theorists have suggested, computer-generated imagery can be fetishized in the same way that the human body is often fetishized in cinema, then CGI, in the same way, can be seen to relate to these notions of Freudian castration anxiety. In visual terms, we can make note of the properties that the creature in The Abyss, as well as CGI creations in other films of this era, take on. The alien entity penetrates into the womb or uterine space of the underwater facility, a practically made and very observably material space. Though it is seemingly made of water, it moves in defiance of gravity, and follows a probing phallic head through the submersible station. The hapticity of the unnatural being is emphasized through its reflective, watery texture, and is effectuated in the story by the character of Mary, who seems compelled to touch the alien creature.
Look, she has to touch it. She can't not touch. She can't not touch. Once she sees, look at that. Once she sees something, she's got to.
This interaction between the unreal element of CGI and the actual representation of the human being alludes intrafilmically to the collision between the known world and the uncanny, but also extrafilmically to the old and familiar realm of practical effects, meeting the new and strange possibilities of digital filmmaking. This penetration of the unreal into the real provokes the audience to fetishize the image, to distract from its symbolic nature as a castrating threat. Another salient attribute of the creature in the abyss is its ability to mimetically impersonate human beings. We see the alien entity replicate the appearance and behavior of human characters. While within the film itself this detail holds little importance to the plot, from a theoretical standpoint it relates to a tendency in early CGI to fixate on the replication of human beings. Sticking with the work of visual effects pioneer James Cameron, we see this very plainly in one of the biggest blockbusters of the 90s, Terminator 2. Terminator 2's antagonist is the T-1000, a liquid metal killing machine brought to life through cutting-edge CGI. Much like Cameron's digital creation in The Abyss, the T-1000 is at once liquid and solid, viscous but dangerously concrete at will. In psychoanalytic terms, this posits the T-1000 as a hermaphroditic entity, simultaneously male and female, castrator and castrated. In terms of visual effects, this duality is echoed through the frequent use of CGI to display the Terminator's unnatural abilities, but also the use of practical effects and a real actor, Robert Patrick, to play the character. The T-1000 thus blurs the divide between the real actor and the artificial creation, the human and the machine. Also, like the alien in The Abyss, the T-1000 is revealed to be able to mimic and replicate the appearance of human beings. In his book Performing Illusions, author Dan North theorized of a scenario in which computer-generated actors, or synthespians, would become indistinguishable from human performers. The psychoanalytic anxiety summoned by the T-1000 is therefore not limited to its properties as a threat of castration, but also its pervasive ability as a CGI simulation to replicate and become indistinguishable from its referent. In today's era of motion capture and facial tracking technology, computer-generated actors are becoming increasingly lifelike, meaning that Dan North's hypothesized world of synthespian actors may no longer be so far-fetched. Slavoj Žižek theorizes that, as viewers, the act of looking at these CGI creations is a sort of mental game, wherein the task of distinguishing the artificial image from the real one becomes a fetishistic exercise. The recognition that an image is impossible issues a sort of challenge to us on a subconscious level, and the voyeuristic pleasure we derive from this is in being able to distinguish when we are seeing CGI versus when we are seeing something authentic. Žižek asserts that the anxiety brought about in this exercise is not that we will be in some way overwhelmed by our underlying fears, but rather that we will achieve a point where the computer-generated image is so spectacular and so indistinguishable from its real counterpart that it satisfies our Lacanian lack. That psychological void that we yearn to fill with objects of visual titillation might disappear, and in achieving this level of fetishistic fulfillment, we may suffer the death of desire itself. With the ever-increasing popularity and advancement of visual effects today, it is not impossible to imagine eventually reaching a level of technological omniety, where not only could computers create images that are indistinguishable from their real-world counterparts, but wherein they could be shaped into visions of a nature so spectacular that anything real might pale in comparison. In a way, artificial reality thus threatens to someday become more real than real. This is the situation envisioned by Ari Folman in his film The Congress, which features actress Robin Wright playing herself in a futuristic setting, in which her complete digital likeness is appropriated and manipulated, her entire person becoming an entity outside her control. This same technology eventually leads to a world in which nearly everyone alive exists inside of a simulated fantasy, leaving their material bodies behind in the ruins of reality. The parallels to a film like The Matrix are obvious, as both allude to the potential consequences of blind and unfettered technological change. But where these films look forward to an uncertain future, we want to conclude this video by looking back to the silent era of 1923, and a German film called Warning Shadows. Warning Shadows, or Schatten, ein nächtliches Hallucination, nailed it, tells the story of a wealthy baron and his wife who are entertained during a dinner party by a shadow puppeteer. As the puppeteer performs a play based on the lives of the hosts and their guests, they see shadowy versions of themselves materialized and soon rendered indistinguishable from their true selves. The shadow play is a drama wherein the secret indiscretions of the lord and his wife are brought to light, resulting in a tragic and bloody conclusion. When the play comes to an end, the narrative returns to real-life characters who, like the audience, have simply watched these events transpire. Yet despite the fictional nature of the story they have just observed, we see them deeply affected, forgiving one another, despite no actual ordeal having taken place. This film, made long before the first computer was ever built, speaks to the same themes that we observed in the early efforts to reconcile the use of CGI into the filmmaking arts. We see the fear of phallic penetration by the illusion, the haptic qualities of the shadows themselves, the synthespians, the shadow representations of real actors, who appropriate and use their symbolic likeness, producing very real consequences. These are thematic concepts inherent to cinematic representation, and the advent of CGI simply another instance of age-old questions being brought back into the light. Great films, whether silent and in black and white or visually spectacular blockbusters filmed in IMAX 3D, will employ themes and motifs that recognize this relationship between the viewer and the filmic image. Thus, as creators and consumers alike, we are able to better understand the nature of film not just as a projection onto a screen, but as a mirror that is as much about the people watching as the subjects they observe. The filmic mirror doesn't just reflect us, it becomes us, changes us. In contemplating the birth and maturation of CGI, its thematic origins in films like Warning Shadows, and its potential future, we are made to wonder what truly separates the simulated image from the ones we experience day to day. The realm of shadows from the desert
of the real.